Welcome to the 2009 Fusion Podcast, presented to you by the Oregon Ministry Network. Fusion, a conference for next-generation ministry leaders, took place November 12th through 14th at the Kaiser Renaissance Inn and Conference Center. The following workshop, entitled Legacy, the Ultimate Measure of a Leader, was led by Jay Anderson.
For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jay Anderson. I used to work in the district office. I was the Brian Eno before Brian Eno, and so that's why I know a number of you. Anyway, I'm hanging up in Tualatin in a brand new adventure as superintendent of a private Christian school. And if you'd have told me a couple of years ago that I was going to be doing that, I would say you're nuts. And so it's been a grand adventure. Both of my boys attend the high school there at Horizon, and so it's not only difficult at work, but I get home, and whenever there's an issue, my wife looks at me and says, "Do something, Mr. Superintendent." So there's just nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. We're going to talk a little bit about legacy this morning. One thing that I'll say, I see a couple of my buddies from Valley Life Center in Dallas. I lived in Dallas for a little over 10 years and was on staff there recently. And it was funny because I went from about a decade of being district youth director and almost 2 decades working in youth ministry. And when I came to Valley Life Center as an associate, one of the primary functions that I had was to be the children's pastor, and it was supposed to just kind of be for how it goes, perhaps, just for a couple weeks, couple months, and I ended up coordinating a couple of VBSs, and so it was kind of one of those. The Lord has a tendency to put us into situations that are just kind of nice learning curves, and so I've done a little bit. For those of you, how many children's workers are in the house? Okay, there's a few of you. All right, so I felt your pain, for a while, and I admire you even more. So after a couple of months, I was like, okay, this is great. And after a few months more, I was like, holy cow. So anyway. But I am in a place right now. My dad was actually a public school superintendent, and he retired about 5 years ago, and then he hadn't had enough, and so he went back for an interim position for another couple of years. But I have always had a big love for education, and of course, being in youth ministry for a couple of decades, had a huge love for students. And so I'm in a position where I kind of refer to it as kind of when your life becomes a Reese's peanut butter cup. For those of you that anybody like Reese's, peanut butter cup? Okay, and you're children's workers, so there you go. That's for you. Okay. But where two great the old Reese's commercials where two great tastes come together, and so that's kind of how I feel right now. I kind of feel like this is a place that I was just made for, and sometimes we feel like that in life and ministry, and other times we just shake our head and go, wow, and maybe it's the next day. You know what I mean? It's like I was made for this, and then the next day is like, wow, what am I doing? I have no idea. But anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about legacy, and I came across online the top earning dead celebrities as listed by Forbes magazine. Any guesses who might be number one on the top grossing? Yes, sir. Michael Jackson. He is on the list, but he's not number one. Elvis Presley's on the list, but he's not number one. Farrah Fawcett is not on the list, but she probably should be. I have some. Yes, I have some great memories of Farrah back when I was just a wee lad. Yes, another guess? Huh? Not Ronald Reagan. Not on the list. Okay. Not Mother Teresa. Any other? Yes?
Princess Di.
Not Princess Di either. Yeah, some good guesses, but no. So some of these I've never heard of. Like number 13 is a fashion designer named Andy Warhol. and $6 million last year. Speaking of Farah, Aaron Spelling brought in $8 million. He was the one that came up with Charlie's Angels and some of the other ones. So he's still, I don't know how long he's been dead, but $8 million last year. Jimi Hendrix is actually number 11. The old, Purple Rain, rocker from the. When did he die? Like in 57, whatever. When was it?
I think it was 1970 or 71.
1970 or 71. Yeah, but that was his hymn, that everybody remembers, Purple Rain. Okay, sorry. Number 10, Michael Crichton, $9 million. The Jurassic Park and ER and what's that? Yeah. He died of cancer, I guess, a couple of years ago. Number 9, Albert Einstein, $10 million. Number 8, Dr. Seuss, $15 million. Tied with John Lennon at $15 million. Welcome, guys. Number 6, Charles Schultz, $35 million. The Peanuts guy. Number 5 is J.R.R. Tolkien. 50 mil last year. Yeah, so then number 4 is Elvis Presley, still racking it in at 55 million. Number 3, Michael Jackson, 90 million this last year. So he was, obviously it's his first time on the list, and so that could possibly go up, or it could,
Well, his movies over
so
100 million right now.
Is that right? Jeez, that's just still the weirdest thing. Number 2, Rodgers and Hammerstein, $235 million. I mean, it goes up really fast right at the end here. Rodgers and Hammerstein, 235. And then I had not heard of number 1, and I'll probably butcher his name, but Yves, Y-V-E-S, Yves Saint Laurent, fashion designer. What is it?
Yves Saint Laurent.
Okay, say it again.
Yves Saint Laurent.
Okay, see, I took Spanish, not French. So anyway, $350 million. So fashion designer from Paris, I believe. So is that right? What can you tell us about Yves?
He's a fashion house, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Like Chanel or.
Yeah. Okay. So there you go. But dead for how long? I don't know. When he died, but $350 million just last year. So from the grave. So anyway, so people with a legacy, or maybe not so much. What's the legacy of Michael Jackson going to be long term? Other than just wow, how sad, his life was in so many ways. When Brian Eno asked me to do this workshop, he was talking about the theme being passing the baton, and as I began to reflect, and he kind of gave me a blank check, to go whatever direction as far as leadership is concerned, I immediately began to fixate on legacy. Perhaps it's because I'm, reaching the middle age years, altogether too quickly. Oh, I'm sorry, I got really excited. Purple hat just went by. It's probably Vikings, but anyway. Regardless of your age, thinking in terms of legacy, it needs to be something that's kind of more than just interesting and more than just kind of a humorous reflection for us. One of the greatest books that I believe has ever been written on leadership, and if you haven't read it, you need to drop everything and read it, in my opinion. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is still, I read it years ago, and I think it's still one of the greatest books, because it's one of those that's not just dealing with leadership, but also dealing with life. Written by a Mormon guy, and so obviously there are a lot of values that we share, but there's some beliefs we don't. But really focuses very much on leadership. It was the rage, a couple decades ago when it was written now. But some of the truths are just really, really timeless. And one of the things that there are a couple of things that I just think about on a regular basis in my life and leadership, as far as a couple of the 7 habits. One of those, and this is just free, is seek first to understand, then to be understood. That's the best thing that I have ever learned regarding conflict resolution. There's always another side to the story. And as bad as someone can make it sound, it's amazing how when you talk to the other side, how there's another side. But also, when you come into a situation and you don't have both guns blazing, but you come in and you listen and you say, I'm going to understand this person before I take their head off. And there have been many times where I've done that, and I've saved myself from tremendous embarrassment and damaging a relationship. And there's other times where I haven't done that, and I have come in both guns blazing, and it's been, a disaster. So that's one of them. The other one is beginning with the end in mind is another one of the habits. And when it comes to legacy, I think all of us need to live our lives that way. You've heard it said, that doesn't matter how fast you're going if you're going in the wrong direction, or how high you climb on the ladder if the ladder's leaned against the wrong wall. So when we think in terms of our legacy, what do we want to be said about our lives? And what is the end that we have in mind? That's one of the great habits, according to Covey, that we can help to cultivate and develop. Now, there are many transitions in leadership and many transitions in our life. And I believe that we're at a real critical crossroads in our fellowship. And I'm grateful that our leaders see this, both on the district level and the national level. And that is just that natural process of leadership transitioning from one generation to the next. And that's something that I see in the district. That's something that I see nationally, people addressing. And those of you that are credentialed ministers perhaps have come across this. This was just sent in the mail from our General Superintendent, George Wood, called Your Life, Your Legacy. And if you have this, it'll just take you a quick one-session read. But he talks about his family that were missionaries in China and how they came back to the U.S. and planted a couple of churches, and one that he focuses on where it was really, really difficult. Jeffersonville, Illinois, I believe, is where it was at, and he kind of charts a little bit of that experience and how sacrificial and so on, and how they didn't see, the immediate fruit, from there. But anyway, something our fellowship has really, I think, been focusing on appropriately, and we really need to get this right. It's not unique for our generation, obviously. Every generation needs to pass off the leadership baton from one generation to the next, not for the sake of the denomination, but for the sake of the expansion of the kingdom. It's true in every fellowship, in every location. It's about the kingdom of God expanding and that baton being passed from one generation to the next. I believe that's the ultimate handoff of leadership. It's not between the individual ministries, and I think it's important, like you focused during the course of this conference, handing off ministry from one ministry to the next as students kind of go, between the different ministries. It's funny, Pam Stamridge is here this morning. Hi, Pam. And early on in my, I'll just share, one of the testimonies that wasn't, so powerful from my early days at People's Church in Salem. But I was just young and, energetic and gung-ho, and I'm coming in as the new junior high pastor. And so we were working on the transition between, the sixth graders that are ending with Royal Rangers and Missionettes, and coming into the junior high. So we're just like, okay, we're going to make it fun and energetic and exciting and so on. And Verda Rubottom was the Missionette coordinator at the time. She's been at the national office now. Well, she was for a number of years. But I came up with what I thought would be a really fun and engaging and compelling theme called Rescue the Hostages. And I just thought that was great, fun, and now you're coming into a new season, and for whatever reason, Verda didn't really like that theme so much. I still haven't quite figured it out. Maybe you can help me with that. But perhaps we can do a little bit better job with our transitions than that young energetic junior high pastor did. But I believe the ultimate handoff is not between the individual ministries, or even from one minister to the next, one children's pastor to the next, or one youth pastor to the next, but between generations of leadership. All of our lives have been influenced by previous generations, or better put, our lives have been somehow stamped by the messages and the messengers of previous generations that are ahead of us. So what I would like to do today is just kind of chart a little bit, and this is for some of you like me that, in order to stay awake during a session or whatever, if I have something to not only read but maybe fill in a blank here and there, if I kind of look at this and I kind of see there's hope that he's actually moving towards conclusion. So if you're like me, this is helpful to you. If you're not, then you can take out your pen and you can just draw pretty pictures, and you'll still get full credit, whether you fill in the blanks or whether you draw me a pretty picture. So. All right. So the ultimate handoff isn't between individual ministries or even between individual ministers, but between generations of leadership. And then all of our lives have been influenced by previous generations. Better put, all of our lives have somehow been stamped by the messages and mentors of previous generations. Their legacy will live on in our lives and in our leadership. So again, this morning, I'd just like to share with you some of those messages and some of those mentors that have stamped my life from the generation of leadership ahead of me. The first I will call the lawgiver. The lawgiver. We love that. I don't know what game that is, for those of you that are gamers, but or maybe it's a car commercial. But I am the lawgiver. Have you seen that? It's my boys and I say that all the time now. It's just funny how some of these dumb commercials will just get into your vernacular, and it's I think it's a Toyota Tundra, and he's going through and they're killing dragons and all of that, and they are the lawgivers. But the ultimate lawgiver is a guy named John Maxwell that some of you may know of, some of you may not. I've read, probably most of what Maxwell has written, and he was kind of the leadership guru, of a previous generation, is still involved in writing books and so on. But he wrote 2 books. One of them, I'll talk about a little bit later, called The 17 Indisputable Laws of Teamwork and the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And these are mouthfuls for sure, but they're great reference books. In fact, I just referenced, one of those just this past week in a leadership situation that I'll talk about. But if you've not yet, gotten acquainted with John Maxwell and his laws of leadership and teamwork, it's really worth a look. He was a former pastor and then kind of became what was referred to as America's leadership expert. But one of his chapters in this book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, is called The Law of Legacy. And in that, the notes that you have there kind of talk about one of the things that really stuck out to me in a big way. His subtitle to this chapter was "A Leader's Lasting Value is Measured by Succession." And what he says here that's really worth remembering is he kind of juxtaposes 4 words. The first is achievement. Achievement comes to someone when he's able to do great things for himself. So that guy has really achieved. He has really done great things. And when he's able to accomplish something great for himself, that is referred to as achievement. Success is the next. Success comes when he empowers followers to do great things with him. So he hasn't just achieved something individually, but he has become successful with people. The next is significance. Significance comes when he develops leaders to do great things for him. So a great transition from just doing great things by yourself to mobilizing and doing great things together. And now significance is when people are actually doing the work for you. And then the fourth is a legacy is created only when a person puts his organization into the position to do great things without him. And he said there's very few leaders that can be said about their life and about their leadership is it's even stronger without them. And John Maxwell was pastor of a huge church, I think it was a Wesleyan church in San Diego. And he talks about in this chapter, one of his greatest experiences in life was after leaving that church. And I mean, I don't know if they pioneered that church or if they, just came in there when it was small, but they led this church through this big building project and all of that, and a lot of people had gotten saved and so on, and so they left after I think like 3 decades there at that church, and they brought him back for a fundraising campaign a couple of years later. And he said he got done with this presentation and he grabbed his wife's hands and they headed out the door, and the realization hit him that they are doing better at this church without me than they were doing with me. And he said it was so different from my first pastorate, where I was young and energetic, and he was in Hillham, Indiana. He talks a lot about it in his leadership stuff. And when he came in there were just a small handful, and when he left, there were 300 people. And it was just like this, you blink and you miss, little stop sign type village. And I mean, they're coming from all over. They've got 300 people. But a year after he left, it just went, right back down. And he was like, what is the deal? We were doing all these great things and so on. But that's where he began to learn the law of legacy, where he was, as he focused later on leadership, he was putting some systems and investing in leaders and so on, to where when he left, it didn't miss a beat and continued to move forward for the kingdom. So great message from the lawgiver. All right. The next is what I'll refer to as the antagonist. The antagonist. And this is a guy with a great legacy, but perhaps some of you have not heard of Tony Campolo. How many of you have heard of Tony Campolo? Okay, all right, so maybe not even half. How many, by the way, have heard of John Maxwell? Okay, he's a little bit more, okay, a few more of you. Tony Campolo, I don't know if he still is, sociology professor at Eastern University in Pennsylvania. I think it's in the suburbs of Philadelphia. But a radical youth evangelist. And I mean, just one of those in-your-face type personalities, and just had such a passion for reaching people in need. And in fact, he's kind of famous for, when I say radical, I mean he was radical. And he actually went out one night, when he was speaking in a city, and he actually hired a whole bunch of prostitutes and brought them to his room and actually fed them ice cream and showed Disney movies. Because he thought, for one night I can rescue these ladies and minister to them. So it's like, okay, no small controversy there. Don't recommend doing that. But that's the kind of person that he was. I remember showing a video in my youth group, and he made the statement on there, because he's so into ministering to the poor, that you can't be a Christian and drive a BMW. And the drummer in my youth group, his mom, had this hot, red Beamer, and so he kind of got his attention really quickly. But Tony was kind of he would make these hyperbole statements, and he would even cuss during a message, and people were like this, and he goes, "You're more upset about me cussing during this message than you are with the poor in Haiti." He's just that kind of, and he would say it that way. Very much a huge social justice guy. But the message that he shared that I will never forget, in fact, I still refer to this quite often, but in one of his messages he talks about his pastor, who's a black pastor from South Philadelphia. And he was ministering on a Sunday night to the high school graduates. It's kind of like that church, focus on graduates to celebrate their graduation, and they're so excited, and so they come in. Oh, our church is going to honor us, and there's probably cake in the foyer, and all of that. And the black pastor gets up there to share on this Sunday night celebratory occasion, and this is how he starts out. Children, 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 you're all going to die. You're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. And they're going to bury you 6 feet under, and they're going to go back to the church and eat potato salad. So that's how he starts out his message. And everyone's like, okay, not exactly what I was expecting. That's so encouraging, Pastor. Thank you. I'm so edified. But he went on to talk about how when you die, what is going to be said about your life? Is it just going to be titles, or is it going to be testimonies? And so his pastor began to kind of walk through from Genesis to Revelation the people that had the titles versus the people that had the testimonies. So he starts out, oh, Pharaoh, that's a fancy title. Powerful man. Great title, Pharaoh. But Pharaoh had the title, but Moses and the children of Israel had the testimony. So he just kind of walks his way through all the scripture. And that has been one of those messages that just really stuck with me, and I imagine really stuck with those graduates from South Philadelphia. Not just living for the titles, but living for the testimonies. The process that I just mentioned to you, I referred to the 17 laws of teamwork, the indisputable laws versus the irrefutable laws of leadership. But one of those is called the law of the scoreboard. And one of the process that my leadership team and I are looking at is, how are we going to know that we're winning? When we think in terms of church ministry, oftentimes we default to, how is attendance? How is our facility or the buildings, and how is the cash? So the ABCs. Or for those of you that like alliteration, you've got 3 B's. You've got building, bodies, and what was the other one? County, huh?
Bread.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, building bodies and something other. Anyway, but you get the idea. And oftentimes, those are the only things that we use to measure success. And so he talks in terms of the scoreboard, and in leadership determining how do we know that we are having significance? How do we know if we are being effective? Is it just that we've got a lot of people coming to our VBS, a lot of people coming to our weekly meetings? Or is there more? Is it just that we have this wonderful youth facility, with walls that have been spray painted and, so on? Or is there more? Is it just that, our budget is balanced? Yeah, I'll leave just a moment for, the chuckles, so I don't know if your budget is like, my budgets, but my budget this year right now that I turned in and was accepted was over $500,000 in the hole this year for Horizon Christian Schools. So we're slowly, we lost with the economy over the last couple of years. At least that's what I say. It was the economy, it wasn't the leadership. But we're trying to work our way out, of a very significant deficit. But when we think in terms of that, one of my principals said, I'm working, and I'm seeing this big deficit, and I'm seeing this issue that we're dealing with, and I just want to know, am I doing a good job? I want to know, are we hitting it here? So one of the things that we're looking at is the scoreboard. And is it just the enrollment of the school? Is it just getting our budget, to zero? Or are there some more things that we can use to measure our success? Like if you go to a Blazer game, you've got the main scoreboard in the middle, but if you look kind of up in the rafters, you've got the hustle board that's there. That's the rebounds and the turnovers and the block shots and the steals and so on are things that they're measuring. Obviously, the bottom line is, who's winning the game, but there are some indicators. And one of the indicators that we have looked at is that whole idea of testimony. So even though the budget may be swimming in red, when you've got students that are writing some things like this, I absolutely love this school. My testimony from this year would be from the fall. I was really stressed out, felt like I was failing everyone and not living up to any of my expectations. I felt overwhelmed and down. I prayed about it, and God encouraged me, helped me to realize that it's not all about me. That's a great message. And that while my problems may seem so huge at this moment, they won't matter in the big scheme of things. I am only one of the billions of people in the world, and God has blessed me with so many incredible opportunities. And by realizing this, it made me want to do something with my life. I don't want to only live for me. Right now, I've only been basically living for me, school, sports, eating, friends, etc. Really, what have I accomplished? I don't want to die and go to heaven and have God say, great job living for you. I want Him to say, good job, you live for me, something bigger than yourself. So, well, that's great. From Kaylee. Sarah said, this has been my third year at Horizon, and I can honestly say that without all the incredible people at Horizon, the amazing staff, I would be so lost in a world I stand no chance against. If I ever have had a bad night or a bad weekend, know the next day I can walk in the doors and see Carolyn's smiling, loving face, and then up the stairs waving to people I pass on the way up, and then together to Mrs. Gway's room or Mrs. Kanja. They always lighten up the darkest of days. I have changed so much in the past years, even within this one, and I just want to thank everyone at Horizon for their continued love and support. Horizon Christian is such a blessing that has changed my life forever. And Sarah, talk about an incredible testimony of a young lady who had made some just awful choices and dealt with an eating disorder and some of those things. And you read some of those types of things and you just go, okay, I can do this another day. And I think in ministry, that needs to be one of the things on our hustle board or main scoreboard or however you want to do it. But when you think in terms of testimonies, and the hard part is, especially I would say in children's ministry, is we don't always get to hear the testimonies and we don't always get to see the testimonies. Kind of like that sponge that's filling up with water and it doesn't seem to change at all, but pretty soon it's so full, and when you pick it up it's just sopping, and you wring it out and you realize what a transformation has taken place. That's the business that we're in and working with kids and youth. But realize that there are testimonies that are being written right now. Probably the best testimonies of your life and your ministry are the people that even right now that you're investing in. So I would say even when, all you see is an insolent, rebellious kid that, just seems like they will never change, and you see them walk into the room and you just go, oh, couldn't they just, why did they have to be so faithful and the good kids be so flaky, But your investment in them is making a difference. And so when you get a hold of those testimonies, let those be measuring rods of your ministry, not just the fluctuating economy or the fluctuating attendance or the youth room in the basement. All right, so testimonies versus titles. The next is who I'll call the campaigner. The campaigner. And I'm not talking in terms of politics this morning, although we could. But I'll, since this is being taped, I'll be careful. But the campaigner is a person I refer to. The messenger I refer to is Josh McDowell, one of my greatest heroes in life and ministry. How many of you have heard of Josh McDowell? Okay. Amazing how, Josh has just gone through the generations, and he's kind of one of the oldest living youth evangelists, perhaps. But talk about someone who has stayed relevant, and his message and his ministry have just been incredible. Josh McDowell started out as a Campus Crusade for Christ guy, an on-campus college campus type guy, and from that did a lot of apologetics. He actually came to Christ on the college campus, and many of you have heard his story, his testimony, when he was, I can't remember what school he went to, but there was a Christian community that kept reaching out to him, and they nagged him so much that he finally said, you know what, I'm going to shut these stupid Christians up, and I'm going to shut them up because he knew enough about the Bible to know that all he had to do was disprove the resurrection, and the whole message of Christianity would crumble. And he's right. But what happened was, as he began to research and so on, what came out of that was, the textbook, ultimate textbook on apologetics is, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And, this is one of those, if you want to, go through an apologetics course, and this is just like, really heavy academic stuff.
but evidence for our faith. And how many people's lives, including mine, have been touched by not only the big, huge textbook, but from the video series and some of the other, type books, and a couple of them that he steered directly for students. One of those is Beyond Belief to Conviction. Great book there. And another one called Right from Wrong. So when it comes to apologetics, what an incredible impact. And you can go to the Christian bookstore today and it's just filled with just some of his reasons and, reasons for your faith and evidences and, so on books all over the shelves still today. Another one of the campaigns that he had was called The Disconnected Generation after 9/11. And that was not only a book, but these became, the reason I call him the campaigner, is they became mini campaigns where he would come out with not only a book, but a video series and a series of teachings and so on that would address some of these things. And so after 9/11, after Columbine, he did ravenous research and he began to put out some resources, for local youth ministries, children's ministries, church ministries that have just had incredible impact. Another campaign that he was involved in was helping the needy in Russia not long after the Iron Curtain fell. And perhaps you were watching in the news this past week. I remember so clearly, in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. And it was just one of those days that you just would never imagine would ever happen. And I remember watching the newscast. In fact, I was online and I was, on the 20th anniversary, they were, I was watching the old NBC clips and so on. It was just one of those occasions that everybody just stopped and went, this can't be happening. The same wall where they'd shoot somebody if they got too close. People were up there dancing on the wall and they were, hacking off hunks of rock from this wall. One of those is at least when I was there, was in the network office, big chunk of the Berlin Wall. And so I was describing to my boys, this incredible occasion that happened. And of course, there's it just doesn't compute when you haven't been in a world that it lives in constant fear of thermonuclear war between the U.S. and Russia. You've got Rocky IV. How many of you remember Rocky IV? Okay, yeah, okay. East versus West and Ivan Drago, and you grow up like this, going get him, and get those communists, and then you just never thought you would see the day, of this incredible collapse. Well, the collapse happens, and fortunately, there were a number of ministries that just immediately, came in, and instead of it being illegal to smuggle Bibles into there, they were coming in with not only Bibles and ministry, but food, and unfortunately the cults were, coming in as well. But Josh was one of those that just immediately began to go in and just do some incredible work of ministry there, and I think probably still does that to this day. So even though he was doing apologetics work and outreach work on the campus and all of that, he's over in Russia all the time, and he actually came and spoke. He was another one of the campaigns he was very involved in that Tom remembers well, was campus ministry, and he's probably still involved in Youth Alive and so on. And we actually had him come and speak at an event for Youth Alive and talk about the evangelists. And I remember he went back and he was asking me about my boys and so on. And, my boys were quite young back then. And he sent to my boys, as a thank you, a couple of authentic, Russian military hats that are like a prized possession of mine. I gave them to the boys and they tossed them in their closet and they were gathering dust. And so a couple of years ago I said, do you still have those Russian hats that, that my buddy Josh gave us? And, and they did. And so I have them in my office. But amazing man. But I'll tell you that the thing that I remember was so influential to me in my college days was another campaign called Why Wait? And some of you remember that, and I taught Why Wait principles all the time after I heard this message. And I remember the first time I heard it was at Jesus Northwest when he was speaking years ago. This was in the, the late 80s. And I remember, because every youth minister, children's minister, talks in terms of sexual purity. But oftentimes, especially in the late 80s, it was just don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And Josh was one of those that came in with positive reasons to wait. And I'll again, just like it was yesterday, the powerful message of why does God want you to wait? Because He wants to provide for you the ultimate in sex, because He created it after all, and He wants to protect you from the harm, of sex outside of the confines that God has established. And you can say that about any form of sin. If you will it's not about this, but it's about God wants to provide for you the ultimate life, the ultimate experience, the ultimate fun. And if you will do things God's way, you will see His incredible provision. And you will be protected from the ravages of sin. And so He just, began to highlight all of that. And it was one of those where I just went, wow, that's just good. And it's preached for years. So the campaigner. And, that was a message that just got stamped in me. Again, not only for sexual purity, but just understanding the love of God. The love of God is so incredible and reaches so high and reaches so low. And the heart of God is He wants to provide and He wants to protect. And the message of the great apologist is you can have confidence and you can have boldness in your faith, because there is evidence that will stand up in a courtroom, for the faith that you have. All right? The next one that I'll mention is what I'll refer to as the purpose whisperer. The purpose whisperer. You hear a lot about, the horse whisperer, that's training the horses, and now you've got the dog whisperer. What's his name that's on that, TV show? Caesar, yeah, that doesn't work with my wiener dogs. I'll just say that, good swift kick, is what works for my wiener dogs. But there is a dog whisperer. But the purpose whisperer is a guy named Rick Warren. How many of you have heard of Rick Warren? Okay, yeah, he's. I'll tell you what, talk about the man. He burst on the scene in Christian circles. I remember the first time I ever heard about Rick Warren was at a Youth Leaders Summit up at Camp Davidson. And I remember a couple of youth pastors came in, and they had picked up this book called The Purpose-Driven Church by Rick Warren. And I remember they showed it to me and they were talking about it. They were so excited about it and so on. And it became one of those staples, in the 90s especially, of how to do church, and establishing the purposes, the fivefold purpose for the church. And some of you might remember the baseball diamond. Do you remember the baseball diamond? And you go from membership to maturity to ministry to mission, and so we were all using the baseball diamond, and even in the AG, it was the We Build People. Some of you remember with the baseball diamond, and that all came from Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Church. Later, Purpose-Driven Youth Ministry, which is a classic book his youth pastor wrote, Doug Fields, and then burst on the scene across the board when he wrote The Purpose-Driven Life. And that's something that so many people have, had their life changed by. 40 Days of Purpose spun out of that, and then 40 Days of Community spun out of that. And I don't know what the next 40 days is going to be. Maybe there is another 40 days coming. I don't know. But new book that I'm getting ready to read that one of my students gave me is The Purpose of Christmas. So I saw that that's at Costco, and so you can pick that up. But the message that Rick Warren has stamped in my life and in so many lives is life and leadership driven by a clear and compelling purpose. Life and leadership driven by a clear and compelling purpose. And one of the words I use all the time with my team is the word intentional. And that's really what purpose-driven is all about. We're not just doing this, when it comes to our life and ministry, but we're really zeroing in on what is it that God has specifically called the church to that's unchangeable, and what has God called us to be as a fellowship. And we zero in on that, and we're taking careful aim before we fire and not just shooting in the air, but being intentional. But our life can be, and so many people found that in the Purpose-Driven Life, that your life can be more than just surviving. Your life can be more than just being successful, but your life can have a clear and compelling purpose. The next quote my pastor actually shared in a message a couple of months ago, and it's one of those that I fixated on, and I have been fixated on ever since. And it's this quote: "When you die, you won't regret your unfulfilled dreams, just your unattempted ones. The first is reality, the second is a tragedy." And I just think, has the Lord given you a dream in your life that you haven't pursued yet? For me, I absolutely love to write. And I've been writing fiction, stories for my boys over the years. I'm a Louis L'Amour lover, and so I, started kind of writing these adventure tales for my boys. And I've always wanted to. For years, I've thought in terms of pursuing publishing, but just to, I'll get to it. And I wrote one of the stories just years ago, and it's been sitting on the shelf. In recent days, I've started writing romance love stories for my wife, and that's one of her Christmas presents every year is to write one of those. And, people read those and they go, "Oh, these are just so good. You need to write a book." And I'm just like, and so many people write books, and there's a lot to do. But it's always been a dream in my mind. In fact, the first time I remember thinking in terms of ministry was when I was in about 5th grade, and I remember just having the thought it would be the coolest thing to be an author and to be a high school Sunday school teacher. That was like way back then, kind of my first thoughts of youth ministry, where it'd be so cool to be an author and a high school, because I was thinking, you could have a pool at your house and have a barbecue and have kids come over, and then I realized there's not exactly the direct correlation between youth ministry and having a pool, at your house, but but anyway, but that's been something that's kind of been in the back of my mind. Who knows where it's going to go? May not go anywhere. But I don't want to get to the finish line and think, what if, I would have pursued that. And for some of you, you might be sitting here thinking, God's given me a dream, but, And you know what? The reality is there are going to be a lot of unfulfilled dreams that we have. And that's what he's saying. That's just reality. But let it be that we attempted. That we at least attempted, because those are the things that we're going to regret, are those dreams that we didn't attempt. So, encourage you with that thought. All right, the final one is the Godfather. The Godfather. The messenger is my dad. Okay, the Godfather. He was a public school superintendent, as I mentioned. One of the greatest teachers I have ever heard. He taught adult Sunday school for years, and he was an absolute master. He was a family man. Obviously, he oversaw Christ coming into my life, and we were very faithful to the house of God growing up. But the messages that I got from my dad, and there were so many, obviously, is, first of all, Allah Godfather, take care of the family. Take care of the family. So, don't mess with my kids. Or, I'll come after you. So take care of the family. The second is, do the right thing even when it's hard. Do the right thing even when it's hard. And one of the jobs that he had as a school superintendent is getting rid of bad teachers. And there's a lot of great teachers that are out there, but there's also a lot of really bad teachers. And it is really, really difficult to get rid of even the worst teachers. So my dad would have to go through just a horrible, wringing process, to get rid of teachers. But he was committed to doing that for the sake of the students. My dad went through an ugly teacher strike when he was assistant superintendent in McMinnville. He actually had to ride the bus to the airport and pick up the replacement teachers and go across the picket lines, with the replacement teachers. And those were very dark and not fun days, to say the least. But my dad was someone that was committed to doing the right thing even when it's hard. The next one is grow. my dad, not only throughout his leadership life, but now that he's retired, he still reads ravenously. He's always wanting to grow. And the quote that I have there, again, this is just a bonus. You can't take this one too far, obviously, but he said, "Son, the secret to happiness is to find a doctor who agrees with the way you want to live." And he meant that in terms of, he blew out his knee playing basketball in running shoes in 1975. That was before arthroscopic surgery. So they had to fillet his knee open and take out cartilage and so on. And so most of the doctors would say just walk or swim, but he always has loved to run, and he still runs to this day, even though he's dealing with migraines and all of that. It's just something that he's always loved. Well, he's got a doctor over in Bend, Dr. McCloskey, that he's been going to for years. And the reason why he goes over to Bend is when he goes to Dr. McCloskey, "Don, you still running?" "Yeah, that's great. Just keep running." So it was worth the trip to Dr. McCloskey, because he was saying, "Keep running, Don." The rest were going, "Stop, don't run on that knee." But anyway, so there you go. So take that one for what it's worth. The question this morning for you to consider and for us to consider is, who are those people that have stamped your life? And to recognize that God has called us to a place of influence where we have the privilege of stamping young lives for eternity. And again, whether you see it or not, it is happening today. It's said that even the most shy, person that's not so outgoing will have opportunity in their life to influence some 10,000 people in their lifetime. So those of us that are in a ministry situation, investing in young lives, have an incredible opportunity for the next generation to stamp those lives. One more that I'll mention to you, and this just came up recently during our missions convention last month. A guy named Dave Reaver spoke. And how many of you have heard of Dave Reaver? Okay, Dave Reaver probably has spoken to more students in public school settings and assemblies than probably anybody who's ever walked the face of the earth. Incredible ministry. He was a Vietnam vet who had most of his face blown off or melted off by a sulfur grenade when he was in the service in Vietnam, and has been used in just immeasurable ways for decades, and he is still at it. I mean, the place that started the whole horror and just the reconstructive surgery and the disfigurement and so on happened in Vietnam, and he's now investing back millions of dollars helping out that country where this atrocity happened to him. Just an absolutely incredible man. But I remember my family was gone during that Sunday when Dave Reaver spoke. So I got online to the podcast and was listening to the podcast. And here's what I was struck with. I've heard Dave Reaver a lot of times, and I mean gripping presentations. And I remember thinking to myself, what he said was like, it was pretty good. But by Reaver standards, it wasn't just like, wow, that was just such an incredible message. But it was still so impacting to listen to him, let alone for the people. You could tell even in the podcast the response that was taking place, from his ministry. And so I got thinking about that, and I thought, when does that transition occur where the messenger actually becomes greater than the message, is how I first started processing that a little bit. And then with my small group, as we were chewing on it a little bit, this realization came to me that was just so profound to me. And that is, Dave Reaver is so incredible in his ministry because the man and the message have become one. To where he could get up there, and it doesn't matter what someone like Dave Reaver says, because he embodies the message so powerfully that he just has to get up and say, hey, and you talk about people that can get up and read the phone book and people get saved, have you seen? And to me, that's that incredible transition where the messenger and the message, just become indistinguishable. And how many people in their life and leadership get to that point where their life and their message are just synonymous terms. And I think when I'm thinking in terms of, the end game and thinking in terms of legacy, that is one of those that just, is something worth pursuing in our lives and our ministry. That we're not only are we, living what we're presenting to the students that we're influencing, but we're embodying that very message. And I'll tell you what, that to me is, again, an agenda that's worth pursuing. Some of you have heard the song "I Want to Leave a Legacy" by Aaron Jeffrey. That goes back a few years, but I remember, that was the moment, probably the greatest moment I can remember at a youth leaders event, where the Masters Commission from Dallas, Oregon, came in, and they did a human video to that song, "I Want to Leave a Legacy," that charted the disciples and how, after Christ is risen from the dead, they're sitting around the table and they're singing "I Want to Live a Legacy," and they're standing up on the table saying that, and as they're being drug away and beheaded, and a new person will stand up and say that, and they will pull him away and put him on an upside down cross. And it was just one of those times where you're just bawling your eyes out, but there was just that resolve and that fire in their eyes. It doesn't matter how many of us you kill, I want to leave a legacy. So it's that kind of living that God has called us to. So my prayer for you today, that you see at the bottom of your notes, is that God will give us, my prayer for us, not just you, but my prayer for us, is that we will on a continual basis get a fresh stamp of Jesus on our life. That God will give us that in-game perspective as we go about our ministry, that won't be lost in just the slogging out of ministry. Because it's oftentimes not the song is playing and we're standing up on the table like that. Oftentimes it's just, we're just slogging it out, Wednesday in, Wednesday out, Sunday in, Sunday out, wondering if we're making a difference. But may God give us that fresh perspective and that fresh motivation that says, I'm going to stamp young lives, I'm going to leave a legacy, I'm going to pass the baton to the next generation of leaders, and I am going to, by my very life, become the message that I am presenting. And to me, that's the picture of leadership that I want to be a part of, and I pray will be a reality for you. Okay? So let's pray. Father, what a privilege has been mine today to be able to encourage fellow laborers that you are using to build your kingdom. God, our perspective is so often limited, and the work that you've called us to is often thankless, and often frustrating, and often disillusioning, but often exciting as well, and always significant as we attempt to influence and stamp young lives. My prayer is for each person here, each one of these children's workers and youth workers that you've called by your grace according to your purposes, that God, you would give them a fresh stamp of Jesus in their heart and in their life. May we see you again high and lifted up as never before. Will you fill us, God, to overflowing? Would you anoint us, God, to accomplish your purposes in your way? And God, would you allow it to be said of our lives, as was said about Barnabas, that he was a good man, full of faith and full of the Holy Spirit, and a great number of people were brought to the Lord. God, may that be said of me. May that be said of all of us. And may, God, by your grace and your power and your love, may we truly become Jesus with skin on to our world. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Well, thanks for getting up this morning, and I'd be happy to chat with you. It looks like there's another workshop that's blazing right in here. So anyway, blessings on each one of you.
Thank you for listening to the 2009 Fusion Podcast. For more information on the Oregon Ministry Network and our events, please visit our website at oregonag.org.